If you were to ask any woodworker what the most common and easily accessible type of hardwood lumber there was, the answer would almost always be some type of 4/4 lumber species. Interestingly enough, that's exactly what I have here. This is a stack of 4/4 inch white oak that I didn't know what to do with for the longest time. And despite this 4/4 lumber being more accessible, you don't often see it used in furniture purchased from a big box store or a chain retailer. Now I could list a ton of reasons as to why that is, and we'll talk more about that later in the video. But anyway, in this video you'll see me build a white oak dresser out of this 4/4 inch lumber, and I can guarantee that if you go to the store looking to buy a dresser, you won't be able to find a piece like this. So what you've seen me do over the last minute was to mill up a bunch of individual pieces into specific lengths and widths to create these panels. Obviously, for our shell of the dresser, we'll need a top, a bottom, and 2 sides. Now there's a number of different ways these pieces could be attached, but for this build, I want to try to do something with a little bit more traditional style joinery. So for this more traditional style of joinery, I'm using dado grooves, and I'll cut a rabbet on the ends that will fit right down in these dado grooves, which will allow these pieces to connect. So you might be wondering, why are you using dado grooves? Why not just pocket holes? Don't you have a domino? Wouldn't that be easier? And while pocket holes would certainly be sufficient, and dominoes would be substantially easier, one of my goals with this build, and also this year, is to increase my skill set as a woodworker, which means trying some more difficult and harder joints, and also using hand tools every now and then. Alright, so at this point our 4 panels are cut, and the reason for using real hardwood is just because of the difference in quality between actual wood and plywood. However, I'm going to make one exception here and use plywood for the back panel. The reason for that is because of wood movement. So if you haven't noticed, the grain orientation of all of the shell pieces will be the same direction when it's assembled. Now the back panels that sit down in the dado groove will have the grain running the opposite direction, so if we made that out of hardwood, those panels could actually expand or contract and pop out of the dado grooves on the sides. And while that's just theoretical and maybe not practical, using plywood will allow me to glue these in, which will result in a much sturdier dresser. Also, the back panel is a back panel, and it'll be up against the wall, so nobody will ever see that part. It didn't take long before I had all those rabbets and dados cut, all the pieces lined up and glued together. In fact, if you're going off of the video, it only took me about 3.5 minutes to do that whole thing. And while the glue on that frame is drying, we can get started on the base of this cabinet. Now because this base will be so heavy, I wanted to layer a couple of the 4/4 pieces together to make the entire base a little thicker. And speaking of this base, the goal of the design is more of a modern and mid-century style base. For that mid-century style look, we want to incorporate certain features. The features on this base will be sleek, tapered legs and a crisp, clean profile that works to complement the dresser, especially the drawer faces whenever we get to that part. Now we've already dealt with wood movement as an issue previously with those back panels, but when attaching the base, wood movement again becomes a concern. So once again we have opposing grain directions, which means opposing expansion and contraction, but we can solve this problem by cutting 2 grooves the length of these boards, meaning the furniture bolt can slide along the length of this stretcher, but also keep the cabinet base pinned down, which we'll do with threaded inserts a little later in the video. So with the shell and the frame assembled, it was time to get started on the drawer boxes. Now, drawer boxes are something that I have never done before, and as much as I hate to admit this, after gluing up all the panels in preparation, I couldn't figure it out. So I did what anybody would do. I set the panels in the corner for about 4 months, which hopefully explains why I went from shorts and a t-shirt to bibs and a hoodie in the video. To my surprise, the drawer pieces that I set in the corner didn't magically assemble themselves. So after getting tired of walking over them for 3 or 4 months, it was time to suck it up, figure it out, and get to work. You are witnessing my first ever drawer box, and I decided I wanted to make these complicated and do half-blind dovetails on each joint. Since I'm doing 8 drawers, that means I have to cut 32 dovetail joints. If you're going to do something for the first time, you might as well do it an additional 31 times. Now, are the dovetail joints a requirement of drawer boxes? No, of course not. But it's a really nice hidden feature that you'll only see whenever you open up one of the drawers. I like to think of it as a little bonus for this dresser. As nice as those dovetail joints are, they're only a small fraction of what we actually have to do to get this drawer box assembled. And because the drawer slides I'm using are undermount slides, I have to cut this little notch out of each corner. While this might be a bit more work, I think it's worth it to use the undermount slides because of their full range of motion and added weight capacity. As I mentioned earlier, and in agreement with the overall theme of this video, I'm trying to avoid using plywood and use as much actual hardwood as possible. And for that reason, I'll be making the bottoms of the drawers out of the stock that I have rather than using plywood. To be honest, I just wanted to resaw some of this stock on my bandsaw, since I'm still learning the ins and outs of how to use the bandsaw. So the pieces are first resawn with the bandsaw, and then ripped down the middle because they're flat sawn, which will prevent warping of that panel. The glue on those drawer panels obviously needed to set up and dry, so I took this time as an opportunity to attach the base to the shell of the dresser. As I mentioned earlier in the video, we're using threaded inserts and furniture bolts for this part. And the main reason for that is this dresser will be incredibly heavy when it's finished. And while Z-clips or figure 8 fasteners won't be strong enough to hold the base in place, furniture bolts will definitely be up for the task. So at this point, the drawer itself is essentially finished. So the next step is to clean up that panel using the planer, and then everything can be cross-cut and ripped to the final length. In order to put that panel inside the drawer, we'll be using the same style of joinery that we did on that back panel, which is a dado groove. The only difference here is that since that panel is actual hardwood, we won't want to glue it in place because that panel will expand and contract and there's nothing we can do about it. If we glue it into place, that panel could crack. And I don't know about you, but I don't want any of my dresser boxes cracked in half. So here's a quick look at a drawer box made entirely from white oak stock. And before putting this thing together permanently, we'll want to take it back apart one last time and sand all the pieces down. Once they're connected, it'll be impossible to get the sander all the way down in the box, so we'll take care of that beforehand. Another reason that I like these undermount drawer slides is because of these clips you see me installing here. These clips will snap into place and connect to the slides themselves, which will not only hold them securely in place, but also allow for easy removal just by pushing in on the tabs on the bottom. If you listen closely, you can hear the tabs snap into place in this next shot. Another awesome feature of these drawer slides is that they're the soft close model. This means that the risk of getting your finger slammed in one of these drawers is a whole lot less. Or if you're having a really bad day and you decide to take it out on the dresser, these drawers aren't going to break. So to get all the drawers put in place, all we really have to do is measure out equal spacing, and then each of those slides can be put in place using screws. Now if you find yourself wondering what that equal spacing might be, or that it would be nice to have the dimensions of this dresser, I'm really excited to share that for the first time ever on my YouTube channel, I'll be offering plans for this dresser. And these aren't just any type of plans, but rather professionally developed plans that offer every dimension, every cut list, and every aspect of detail, ranging from the size of each panel cut all the way down to the width and depth of each dado. So if you are interested in building this dresser yourself, or you just want to support the channel, I'll leave a link to the plans down in the description, which are now available for purchase. So you might have noticed a little preview of the drawer faces in those plans, and the drawer faces are really what's going to make this dresser come to life. That's because the entire front face of this dresser will have a continuous grain all the way across. The concept of this continuous grain face really isn't that difficult. In fact, it's just a full-length board cut in half to continue the grain from one side to the other. What is complicated, however, is the fact that I have to precisely mill up each individual piece, making sure I don't get any of the pieces mixed up, but also making sure that I joint the same edge and cross-cut the faces in the same exact location. Otherwise, some of the pieces will have a misalignment, which would defeat the whole purpose of the continuous grain face. Now if there's a most difficult section of actually building this dresser, this part is it. And I'll do my best to explain how we will come up with equal spacing between each piece. So when we attach the drawer faces, we'll have 2 columns and 4 rows. This means that we'll have 3 vertical gaps and 5 horizontal gaps between the drawers. Now elsewhere you might have seen somebody use playing cards to space out drawer faces. But instead of playing cards, I just cut some spacers out of scrap plywood. It doesn't necessarily matter what the thickness of the spacer is, but rather the distance of the remaining gap in the face frame of the dresser. That distance divided by the number of drawer faces is the precise measurement that our drawer faces should be. And while I would consider myself pretty good at finding out specific measurements for something like this, one thing that I didn't expect was the added weight of the drawer faces, which would cause those drawers to sag in the front once the pieces are attached. A quick and easy solution to this was just to put a couple weights in the front of each drawer. This way, any sag from those drawer faces could be accounted for and built right into that dresser front. So how do you attach a face frame when it doesn't have hardware and when you can't access the inside of the drawer? The answer to that question is to use double-sided tape to temporarily secure that drawer face in place. Next, we'll attach that face frame with screws. And again, this is temporary just to mark the location of those drawer faces. In between each row of the faces, we'll put those spacers in place, and this will ensure that the spacing is consistent across the entire length of the dresser. One cool thing about doing it this way is that if those drawer slides on the inside aren't perfectly aligned, it doesn't really matter, because the face frames will make up any difference in the gaps you might have. Next, we can put the bottom screws in each of the drawer. And yet again, this is just temporary to mark that location. So we take the screws out, take that tape off, obviously because, well, tape isn't good enough to hold a drawer face in place. And before we put those drawer faces back in place, we'll use this specialized router bit to cut the drawer pulls actually down into that drawer face, which gives everything a nice modern and minimalistic look. In fact, this is probably my favorite feature of the entire dresser. Because we had previously put all those screws in place, realigning those drawer faces exactly where they should go is super easy. All you have to do is line one of the screws up in the hole, and as long as you're close, when you tighten that screw up, that drawer face will match the same precise spot that it was before. After all that hard work, the last thing we want to do is skip out on the details getting this thing ready for the finish. Those final details include rounding over each edge to soften the profile and sanding everything down in order to achieve a smooth surface. With the goal of keeping the true look of the white oak, the finish that I selected for this dresser is Rubio Monocoat Natural. And for this next part of the video, I think it's only right to let that finish speak for itself. So as this piece of furniture comes together, what do you see? A dresser or a stack of individual boards? While both answers are technically correct, I don't see either of those. What I see instead is the process. The process of what is essentially those individual boards that come together to create this piece of furniture. Regardless, all this piece truly is an arrangement of those common 4/4 boards. But if you can express your vision of those boards in a strategic manner, you might be able to call it a piece of furniture. Thanks for watching.